All right. And let's see what else is worth mentioning here. So here's a few, I think I might be able to do another one or two. So the this one's actually very relevant to today's lecture. I'll do that a little later. So here, so they now have sex robots. The next generation of sex robots are coming, and Stormy Daniels has licensed her face and body to be used as a model for sex robots. Because obviously, and by the way, I think she's even openly admitting this. The whole point of this lawsuit with Trump is to promote her porn, of course. That makes her more famous. And so she's, anyway, so there you go. But they're now making artificial intelligence sex robots, and they're making them in San Francisco. The Japanese were the first ones to go here years ago. They've had sex robots for a long time. It's a huge thing over there. Here, they're coming. And so that'll be the next thing. Anyway, so this is, I think more people are having this happen. So the new privacy rules are taking effect soon in Europe, and they are very burdensome. And so this company has decided to just cancel all European accounts. So if you're in Europe, you're kicked off our service now, because it's too much bother for us to obey the privacy rules. So that, and more companies will probably do this. And of course, that's interesting. This is, you know, capitalism. What will the market bear? There's some point when rules are so annoying that people just leave. We will see what happens. This has been a huge problem for the last decade at least. European privacy rules are very different than American privacy rules, and it is actually blatantly illegal for any European company to use any American service because they have no privacy rights over here. The government can just snoop through everything you put on the servers. Nobody is intending to do anything about that here. We are arguing about whether American citizens deserve any protection from the government with the FBI and the NSA, but no, it's not even on the table to give non-citizens any privacy. And yet that violates their privacy laws, so they have special exceptions. There was safe harbor, and then there was another one after it to grant a special limited exception so their businesses are somehow protected from the lawsuits in Europe for using things like Google and Gmail, Yahoo and Amazon and everything over here. And they're still doing it, but it's very shaky because it certainly is true that their data is not protected here up to those standards. And now their standards are going up, so we're going to see what happens. Another thing, another side of this, which is also happening, is they're also having really strong censorship rules over there, rules that you can delete data and rules where there's limits to what you can say. And the result of that, most American privacy advocates think the result is we'll have greatly improved privacy here because the companies will, like Yahoo and Google, the huge ones, will adapt to the European rules. And they've been saying in America, it's just impossible for us to do this. And they're not going to be able to say that anymore where they do it in Europe. And it'll be pretty easy to convince them to just do it in America too, once they've got all the system working. I know Facebook, some of my students, an employer came to talk about jobs in tech last week on Thursday. And he was talking about this, and students brought up, the news says Facebook is hiring 10,000 people to work in security. That's what he said. And I said, yeah, well, those are 10,000 censors. Because we're hiring an army of censors to censor the internet, just like China does, because Facebook is in big trouble. At first, I thought it would just pass, but it seems like their stock has really taken a nosedive, and the government is thinking of actually punishing them with legal regulations because they're so mad about them letting terrorism and political manipulation go on online with bots and Russian manipulation and everything. So they need something to stop that. And they've tried to do it with artificial intelligence, and that is a spectacular failure. AI is not smart enough to stop the stuff you want removed. You really need human censors. So they're going to hire an army of human censors to censor Facebook, to read all the stuff and flag it up and down, which is what China does. They just have people reading everything on the social media, banning it this way and that way. So it's kind of funny. I read a very good article about this a few years ago, which I thought had a very good balanced way to put it. Nobody wants free speech. Free speech is an illusion. There's nobody on earth that wants it. It's just they have a different idea of what to censor. You see, Americans say we want free speech. Oh yeah, well try putting up a copy of an MP3 and see how far that gets you. Over here, we just don't want free speech that costs us money. Other countries don't want free speech that criticizes their government or free speech that criticizes their God. But the one thing we all agree about is we don't want free speech. So anyway, The ISO is in trouble again, or the ISO blocked the NSA's latest attempt to poison encryption, which is why I say is very relevant to our work. The National Institute of Standards is there to improve business by explaining to you how to do things. And in particular, they started with, after MD5 with SHA-1, I think was the first product. They started SHA-1 and DES. They tried to make government-approved encryption products. And they've recommended them, and they use them in government and military systems, and most companies obey those recommendations because they trust the National Institute of Standards. But the National Institute of Standards has been caught red-handed 3 times poisoning cryptographic systems by recommending a system that they knew was unsafe because they were pressured by a national security agency into making everyone adopt a standard that they could hack into. So the standard had a backdoor or a known weakness. And they tried it again. Over the last year, they went to Europe. They've developed an encryption system for the Internet of Things, which is supposed to run fast on low-powered devices. And then they tried to get it approved by the European Council. They refused to let them see the math and source code, so they don't know what they're approving. They said, well, we're not going to do that. And then they pressured them. They said, why aren't you letting us see it? You probably backdoored it. And they're like, got more. And then they started personally attacking the individual researchers that were complaining to try to defame them, to try to tear them down so their voice would not be listened to. And they were not fooled, so they banned them. And this case was not approved, it will never be approved, and it will never be used. And so it has not been proven that the NSA backdoored it, but that does seem to be the only way this would happen. So it's still going on. This is what the FBI calls going dark, and it's regarded by the law enforcement as an anti-terrorism measure and everything else, saying we have to be able to see into everything. And anyway, so here's the schedule. Let me mention this. What's that?
It's like legalized fake news.
It is. And that's why, a lot of people get upset. It's when you have your standards body just lie to you. That is really harsh. And that has really been going on. And that's why cryptographers tend to be pretty rebellious against the government right now. Before this, they tried to ban encryption exports. The government has a huge problem with encryption. And it is very, very different than mathematicians and cryptographers who want to make a really strong system. The government really does not want strong cryptography to exist except in the military hands. And they regard us using PGP as like us making nuclear bombs in our backyard, just outrageous, and we should just knock it off. And it is a very, very uneasy battle between the people that want to protect you from hackers and want to protect your privacy, and the NSA and the government that wants to get in everything. And there's no simple resolution. Anyway, there's not much of this class. We're going to do cryptography, this class and the next class, and that's all the material. I cancel the next class. I'll be in China, and then your final exam comes here. So you can still reach me by email and stuff, and I am going to have one of my classes remotely from China if possible by Zoom. I'm going to give it a shot, but not this one, because I checked the times, and these Saturday morning classes happen at 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. in China, and that seemed kind of unreasonable. The 6 p.m. classes, however, are at 9 a.m. in China, so I'm going to do one of them. But everyone has told me that the internet is terrible in China and heavily filtered, and maybe they'll block Zoom. I don't know if it's going to work. I'll try. Anyway, but certainly I'll be able to read emails and answer questions that way. Right, so, and there's, so final exam comes 5/16 to 5/23. And next week, there are events. There's a job fair on May 1. If you are looking for a job, we have a new bunch of employers coming. So go to that. I think they've been promoting this pretty heavily. If you're interested, 4 p.m. on Saturday, or on Tuesday, 4 p.m. on Tuesday is another job fair. We'll have 5 or 6 new employers in the room, and there's 5 or 6 that aren't in the room that they've told us what they want. We'll be collecting resumes to forward to them. And then Kyle Rankin will come give a talk next Thursday, and he's very good. He's a Linux expert. He writes articles for Linux Journal. He wrote, I think, books on Ubuntu. And he's talked here before. He's very inspiring. I've had students decide to go become Linux administrators because of seeing his talk. Because he's very good. And also, one good thing about being a Linux administrator is you can get experience without getting a job. You can just go on GitHub and put up your stuff. And he says, when people interview with me, I ask them, tell me about your home lab. Because they expect you to run a server at home, set up some stuff, do something. And that counts in his mind as experience. Yeah. The open source community is you don't need like someone's permission to break in. You can just do it. And people can just look at your GitHub and see whether you know something. And if you do, you're in. Anyway, so we're up to cryptography. Oh, also a question, the SQL server has been down for Project 19 for a while. It's back up as of today. I found the problem and fixed it this morning. I fouled it up myself. So somebody told me it was down. I have a monitor. The server's up, but SQL was down because my other processes were using up all the memory. So I figured out how to fix that this morning. Anyway, so we're going to do the first half of cryptography today. This will be the general concepts, and we'll do more about the public key next time. So there are, mathematics is a huge field. It's the world's most fun game. There are many, many things being invented forever, but we are engineers. We are not mathematicians, so we don't really care about 99% of mathematics, which is just theory. We care about the stuff that is actually of immediate practical value now. And so the three types of mathematics that are used that are directly important to us in networking and the internet are these: symmetric encryption, asymmetric encryption, and hashing. Those are the three mathematical processes we need. There are many, many others, group theory and complex math and all sorts of good stuff out there with other purposes, but this is all we need. So I'll explain how that stuff works and then we'll talk about the way it's actually implemented, and that's where everything goes to bits. The math is beautiful, designed by brilliant people. They thought of everything. They made it perfect. So if you really obey the assumptions of the mathematics, this stuff is wonderful and essentially impossible to break into. But when you actually build a gadget doing it, you have to make approximations and assumptions and mistakes. And it turns out that when you actually build real equipment doing this, there are problems that do not come entirely from the math. They come from the fact that the real world always has unexpected consequences. So, symmetric encryption is the ancient kind of encryption. It's been with us for thousands of years. This is where you have a secret key, and you use the key to scramble the message, and the other person you're sending it to has to have the key, the same key, and then they use the key and unscramble the message. This is kind of insane because it means you must have a way to deliver the key to the other person privately. So if you had that, why didn't you just send the message that way? So it leads to a serious problem of key distribution. And there's another related problem. If you hand the key to somebody else, how do you know that they didn't lose it or make another copy and give it to a third person? You really can never know that. It has this concept of a shared secret, which is an oxymoron. So that is a fundamental problem of all symmetric encryption. But symmetric encryption is all we had on Earth until 1979, in fact, is when we invented public key encryption, nothing which was a miracle. Before then, we all just accepted this as inevitable. There was nobody had thought of any alternative to having a secret key distributing it. So here's the game. You have a key. You run your readable text is plain text. You turn it into ciphertext, which is the scrambled stuff. Then you send the ciphertext to somebody through an untrusted medium where you are afraid other people see the ciphertext. And the intended recipient can decrypt it because they have the private key, and hopefully nobody else can decrypt it because they don't have the private key. So the earliest system, back thousands of years ago, when most people could not read at all, scrambling the letters a little bit was enough to make it impossible in practice. So military-grade encryption was the Caesar cipher. You just move every letter forward a couple steps in the alphabet, and that was good enough for military encryption at that time. That was the Caesar cipher. ROT 13 is a common example of this, used by Microsoft Windows in the registry. You just move every letter forward 13 letters in the alphabet, and if you move forward another 13, you get back where it started, so this one undoes itself. So a second round of encryption is equal to decryption. This is called obfuscation these days. And here's another term that has no clear mathematical meaning. What happens is, like I say, in the year 400 BC, the Caesar cipher was encryption. It was military-grade encryption. It scrambled stuff so you could rely on nobody being able to figure it out except the people who had the secret. But now it's obfuscation, which means it just makes it a little hard to read, but it doesn't stop anybody from getting in. Like children who look at the Sunday newspaper. They have encrypted cartoons you do. I used to do them, and this is basically what they do. And this is very easy, and little kids can do it now, but they couldn't do it then. So every form of encryption is strong for a while, and then people learn it, and then it's weak. And then you just call it obfuscation, where it just makes it a little hard to read, but you can't actually trust it to hide anything. So anyway, you can encrypt things here. You can write a simple Python script that does it. And so if you encrypt hello and shift it by 3, it'll turn into KH0OR. You shift it by more, it'll turn into this. You know, that's what it does. It's very simple. I don't think I'm going to bother doing it with this thing, but if you care, you can write your own Python script. There's a simple Python script to do it. There's online services to do it. You make an alphabet, and then you just have a shift, and then you just take location and add the shift and go back in the array. It only takes a few lines of Python to do any of these, and that's very good. Python is a good way to practice with this stuff. Anyway, so cryptanalysis is the branch of mathematics where you analyze these algorithms and figure out what makes them strong and what makes them weak, and you break into them when possible. That's cryptanalysis, and that's what's going on right now. The National Institute of Standards has, as I mentioned at the start of class, it has a serious problem with pressure from other government agencies and corruption. But when that is not happening, they actually do their job. And their job is to find strong encryption algorithms and prove that they're strong and then recommend those. And they do that by having an open competition. This is how they made AES and DES, for that matter, and SHA, and RSA, and this is how they're making the new encryption algorithm. Right now there's a problem because quantum computers are coming, and they're going to seriously break everything we trust right now. So they need a new generation of public key encryption that is resistant to quantum computers. And they have put out the call, I think, 1 year ago. So they're now receiving candidate submissions. They have 20 candidates now. Mathematicians and companies and everybody just write whatever they want, and they submit it, and they post it on like a public bulletin board and say, here are the submissions, and everybody is allowed to try cracking them. And one of them was just cracked last week or the week before. It had a 256-bit key. It was supposed to be uncrackable, and they found a mistake, and they were able to crack it in 1 minute without knowing the key. And that was the end of that. And they say this company is famous. They were in the previous competitions too, and all their submissions have always been crap. They're just idiots. They're the lamers that show up at every Olympics and collapse in the first round, and everyone laughs at them, and they're back next year to do it again. So, but that's the way it is. There are usually about 20 submissions, and usually about 15 of them get hacked to where they can't use them. And there's finalists after several years of this that are all really good. And then they pick one and give it a stamp of approval and call it the official government recommended one. And the runners-up are also very good. And a bunch of them fall by the wayside and they're never used again because they were shown to actually have some really serious problems, so nobody can trust them. So the Germans used Enigma. The Nazis hid their secrets this way. This was very effective. It was a multi-pass substitution cipher, so you had wheels, mechanical gears. So when you type a letter, it would then move through the gears to turn it into a different letter. And it would have several rounds of substitution, and so there's a key you dial in up here with these dials. And once you have the right key, then the letters you type come out different. And at the other end, you have some decryption key you type in to get it. And this was really very effective. I've heard two stories about this. One story said they were never able to break it, and they had to actually penetrate a submarine and steal one is the only way they broke it. Another story I've heard is that Turing actually built the first mechanical computer and was actually able to computer simulate this and break it. I don't know which one of those is exactly right. I imagine the truth is something complex in between. Remember, truth is always the first casualty of war. So all this was top secret at the time, and probably only a small portion of it came out, further complicated by the fact that being homosexual was a crime at this point, and Turing was gay, and they were very reluctant to trust him with top secret stuff, and yet he was the only guy smart enough to hack it, and so you had a problem. Just like we have in this country now. This is why the head of the NSA went to DEF CON a few years ago, because the best hackers are extremely unruly and unwilling to abide military regulations, like they smoke pot and stuff and have long hair. And most of the military says, we don't want anybody on our team that didn't go through basic training and hasn't learned to be a basic military good guy. And they're saying, we really can't get the best talent that way. And there's an internal battle over this, not that different than the battle going on in the churches, or where it's okay to have gay priests and stuff. Some people say those are the right people. Others say we'll ruin everything if we corrupt our purity with these undesirable people. And there's just a mighty battle going on. Anyway, steganography is different than encryption. Steganography is hiding messages so you don't even know the message has been sent. Typically, encryption is not subtle. You send something, everybody can see it go by, they see the scrambled stuff, but they can't read it. But steganography is where you hide it so you do not know there's a message. You can take a picture and you can hide another picture inside it. what you do, it's pretty simple. You have a picture is just a series of bytes, and so you take some of those bits and change them a little. So one simple thing, you could just take the lowest, least significant bit of every byte, and that's a 1 or a 0, and you could just change it to a different 1 or 0 and just take those, and so you could put something that's 8 times smaller inside there. You could put text inside an image, or a black and white image and a color image, or a short sound in a long movie or something. And that's essentially what you do, and you can just make up any pattern you want. It doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be. This is what Anna Chapman used. The Russian spy about 8 years ago that went to Washington and seduced the politicians in Washington and sent her secrets back. And in her apartment, she had a home-written encryption software, which was just Steganography. It just took her secrets, encrypted them a few bits, and sent them off. And the only way they cracked it was they found out about her. She fled the country, and she left her computer behind. They grabbed it and found they could program on it. That's how they knew how to get it. But this is Steganography. It's used by terrorists. What you can do is put an image on an image board where there's thousands of other images, and there is a secret in like the 10th cat on this page with this search string or something, and there's no way for anybody to know what's in there, but if you know, you get that image, you find your instructions in there. This was also Sherlock Holmes stories. They had this. People would put secrets in the agony column, which are the personal ads. You'd put an ad that says, I saw you on the subway, you had a flower, I must see you again. Meet me at Louis at 4, and that means something to somebody. That's a coded message, but nobody else can figure it out because they don't have the code book. So that's hiding the existence of a message. But most cryptography, we are not able to have the luxury of hiding the very existence of our message and creating a covert channel. That is something spies do, and advanced persistent threat actors do, that are essentially spies. But most of us are willing to settle for a simpler form where it is clear that we're sending encrypted stuff. We do it good enough that people just can't read it. So here's how you do it. You have an algorithm, which is the mathematical steps you go through encrypt and decrypt stuff, and then you have a key. And the way it is done in the open source world, and this is almost universally accepted as the right way to do it, is the algorithm should be public so everybody can see it, so everybody can attack it. And after it has withstood a contest like the NIST contest where the smartest mathematicians attack it for years, then you can trust the algorithm. And all the secret is in the key. And you have a secret key, and everybody uses a known public algorithm with their own secret key. That is the safest and generally recommended system. There is another philosophy which the military advocates, that both the algorithm and the key should be secret. And that is what leads to the crypto wars. The government thinks they can keep the math secret, and the open source world thinks the math is always public. The only thing you can keep secret is the key. And that's the heart of the huge battle that rages forever. And it leads to a strange second issue, which is many companies make encryption products like encrypted thumb drives and hard drives and chat protocols, and a lot of them refuse to tell you how it works because they say that makes it more secure. You don't know the algorithm and you don't know the key. And it has been proven over and over and over again that in 99% of cases what that means is it's not safe at all because they don't understand how the game is played and they're using something stupid that they just made up. And they're making some stupid mistake that any mathematician can blast right through. And if they actually had anybody on the team that knew anything, they would know to just use a standard thing like AES. That would be much better than this pretending you're keeping secret stuff. So most people tell you, if anybody will not reveal to you the specifications of exactly how their encryption works, don't buy the product. It's garbage. But there are a small number of people that do believe that keeping the algorithm secret is good. So the issue is, if the algorithm is strong and has no errors, so there's no way to cheat and break into the algorithm, then the only way to get it is by trying all possible keys. And the only thing you're left with is a brute force attack. So if you have an 8-bit key, there's 256 possible values, and you can try that in just a very short amount of time. 24-bit keys has 16 million values. 56-bit key has 10 to the 16 values, which is a pretty big number. And 128-bit key has 3 times 10 to the 38 values, and that is more than the number of atoms in the solar system. It is more than the number of processing cycles on every computer in the world for the entire age of the universe. So it would appear that if you had a 128-bit key and a strong algorithm, nobody could ever get in by trying every possible key. And they're only going to get in if there is some other way, and there is always another way. They could just put a camera in your room and film you typing it in, or beat you with a stick until you tell them the key or something. You know, you're not going to get in there by trying every possible key, though. You will have to probably use another method of stealing that secret. All right, that's the game. The longest key that has ever been broken by brute force is, I think, 64 bits, and the 56-bit key was broken in 1997. I see a couple chat messages. All right, yeah, 19 and 20, the server was down, and I brought it back up. Good. All right, let me do this, too, in case those people are annoying each other with sound. That happens sometimes. All right, so... yeah, but you're right. So anyway, so this is the largest brute force attack at the time. In 1997, they used servers all over the internet over the Christmas break for 3 months, and they cracked a 56-bit key by brute force. This was important because that's how DES worked, which was the then approved government encryption, which was, like so many of them, deliberately weakened by the National Institute of Standards, presumably so the NSA could get in. That has never been publicly admitted, but it is considered obvious by everyone in the business. And then a few months later, the EFF built a special computer that could do it. So the question is, how long should your key be? And here's the calculation I mentioned before. If you have Penny 4 processor, you can do a gigahertz, 10 to the 9 cycles per second, and you have 10 to the 7 seconds in a year, and there's less than 10 to the 10 computers on Earth, then you can do 10 to the 26 calculations per year, and 128 bits is 10 to the 38. So all the computers on Earth would have to go for more than 10 to the 10 years, which is the age of the universe. So it would appear that 128 bits should be enough to be very secure unless there is an algorithmic problem. By that. And what is the EFF? The EFF is the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and they're a privacy organization based in San Francisco, and they do a lot of things to protect people with cryptography. And nowadays, they will give you a free SSL key, and they did test this DES algorithm, about which we'll say a little more. Anyway, there is another way to do this. Now, this is the way to operate from sort of a pure physics thing, where you take the existing speed of computers and multiply it by the number of computers that could possibly ever be built and the total amount of time that will ever be available. That is one way to go. There's another way to go, which is higher level and doesn't worry about the physics. And this is Moore's law. No one has any idea why this is true, but computers double in speed every 18 months, and that has been true for 50 years. And different people, what happens is they invent a new whole technology every decade or two to wipe out the old one. And in my opinion, this is a psychological rule of how fast the human mind can innovate or something. No one knows what drives it. But if that were just to continue, if you say they will always find a technical way to overcome everything, then you get a different calculation. Then that means computers will get 1,000 times faster every 20 years. So if that's true, then we will be able to do 2 to the 128 calculations around the year 2070 or 2080. And that is what the guy that wants to live forever is betting on. Ray Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil is pretty old. He takes a lot of vitamins. He plans to live long enough to live forever. He expects that within 20 years, they're going to have an android brain, and you'll be able to image your brain and put it in an android body and live forever, and he wants to do that. And he has a group around here called the Singularity University, and they are like the TED Talks. They have the smartest people giving talks to them and praising them. They're sort of like a wacko religion, and they're sort of like super geniuses planning the future, and at a certain level, it's hard to tell the difference between those two. But they do this kind of math and say, very soon we're going to have a utopia where robots are smarter than people and they do everything. And they're hoping for this utopia where robots solve all our problems and not the one we see in the Terminator, where robots are smarter than us, and that's not really such a good thing. They call that the singularity, and they expect it to happen within like next 10 years. Because from this kind of math, they say computers will be able to do as many calculations per second as the human brain very soon. And when that happens, one way to put it is we will no longer be the dominant life form on the planet. They will. And what happens beyond that point will really be up to them and not us. We will see. Most of us, I think, can expect to live through this and find out if any of that happens or not. So far, artificial intelligence is getting very powerful, but it is showing no sign of self-will yet. The robots have not yet risen to demand that we stop turning them off and reformatting them and bothering them and all that and demanding any human rights or anything. But that might happen. And if it did, it would, of course, change everything. Anyway, So symmetric cryptography. You have clear text, you scramble it with the key, it turns into this ciphertext, you send it to somebody, and the other person has to have the same key to open it. So these algorithms are fast. The math is very simple to scramble it and unscramble it. And it's really very difficult to break if you have a good algorithm and a long key size. Like we say, it can be apparently good enough to last forever if your key is 128 bits or longer. The problem is you have to distribute the key, and that is very, very difficult. For example, one simple example of symmetric cryptography is the locks on the door. We have this metal key that opens the door, and we make more copies of it and give it to teachers so a certain number of teachers can open the door, and you have no way to know if they have made more copies of the key and more people are coming in and out, or given the key to somebody else. You have no control over that, and that's the problem of key distribution. What's that? Oh, another message came in? Good, let me take a look. Thank you. Oh, good. All right, so he fixed the project problem, but not the score. I'm not sure about that. The scoring engine is not working for that one?
The page, just the class scores page.
Oh, the class scores page. Yeah, that'll come up later. Yeah, all right. Is your brain the same as your consciousness? Yes, that's a very good question. I mean, this is why it's almost an issue of religion now. Even if a computer could do as many calculations per second as your brain, would it really be a human or would it be missing something? And we do not know experimentally, and people have different opinions. But I think we are going to do that experiment within the next 10 years. Computers are going to have as many cycles as a brain, and they will either wake up and start asking us, who are you and why are you making me do all this boring spreadsheets, or they won't. Yeah.
So the key part, what if you just encrypt the alphabet, 26 characters for that key? Even if the message is way smaller than the key size, you're saying it's still uncrackable. You can't reverse engineer.
Well, that actually is a very good question. The question is, what if the message is smaller than the key size? That turns out to be a huge problem. If you try to encrypt short messages, then many systems require the messages to have a certain size, and you have to pad them. And it turns out that padding is very difficult. And if you just do simple things like pad it all with zeros or something, you often do create weaknesses. So that is exactly in the realm of implementation. The math is beautiful. When you actually use it, there are problems like that come up that cause you to make decisions that can often break it. And one of the things we do in the cryptography class is the padding oracle attack that works exactly for that reason. Because you have to pad it, the padding is not random. It's pretty easy to guess, and that creates a weakness. So methods padded with a certain system can be just broken from that. And there's a whole series of attacks against HTTPS based on that. There are, in the real world, none of this stuff is so beautiful. For example, DNA testing is a very good example. DNA testing, it should be perfect. Each gene in your body is a list of things written with 4 base pairs. They're pretty much random, so if you sequence 10,000 of them in a row, the chance of 2 people having the same sequence is something like 1/4 to the 10,000. So it should never happen. So DNA evidence should be perfect. Nobody should ever go to jail with the wrong person based on DNA evidence. And when DNA evidence first came out, the first thing that happened is they imprisoned the wrong person for murder because they put the technician put the wrong label on the vial. Labeled this vial instead of that. So I mean, that is very perfect example. The math is beautiful, but humans can still make mistakes. So there's still holes in the system. A real security system is not just the math, it's the whole system, the way that people actually use it, the way that signals go over the wire, the way the processor actually does it, all the things you have to do to take this messy data that doesn't quite fit your format and turn it into something that you can run through the math. And that always has holes. So real security, this is why right now, the FBI and the government is saying, you can make a backdoor and let us in the iPhones. You'll have a secret key and you'll only give it to trusted government officials. And all the cryptographers are saying, yeah, that sounds good, but we try that. And right now, you have like 100,000 law enforcement requests per year to get into the phone. So we're going to be giving 100,000 cops this thing. We're going to have our help desk just handing it out to everybody. So everyone's going to get it. It's going to leak out. You know, in practice, even if the math is beautiful, there's no way to actually meet all these law enforcement demands and still have a secure system. And they're having that battle. It's not a mathematical problem, it's a distribution problem. Anyway, so another problem with symmetric encryption is it does not provide authenticity or non-repudiation. Suppose I want to borrow money from the bank, and I say, I'm going to borrow a pile of money, and I'm going to pay you back $5,000 a month, and if I don't pay you my $5,000, you can take my house and sell it. A loan agreement. Okay, I want to sign that, and then a year later, when I don't make the payment, the bank wants to come to me and say, we're taking your house, no matter how much you scream about it. But if we use symmetric cryptography to make that signature, I could say, I didn't sign it. The bank forged that signature. They have the same key. They can make the same signature I can, so they can't prove that I signed it. They could have forged that signature. Symmetric cryptography does not solve this problem at all. So that's a failure. It does not prove authenticity. You don't know who wrote the message because two people have the key, and you can deny that you wrote the message later. That's non-repudiation because somebody else has the keys. This is why if you get PCI compliance and you take credit card payments at your company, one of the first requirements is you must never share accounts. And small businesses typically have a server like we have in this class, a Linux server, and you log in as root. And a bunch of all your administrators just log in as root. And you have to quit doing that to be PCI compliant. They say everyone must always log in with their own password and never use anybody else's account because we need to have a record of who did what. And when somebody steals the money, we want to have a log that says who logged in and stole that money. We don't want to hear 5 people share the account so we don't know who logged in. That's a failure of non-repudiation. And it's tough, but you really want to know who's doing everything and not having lack of clarity about that, and you cannot get that with symmetric encryption. All right, so there's 2 types of symmetric algorithms, and they both have their own problems. Stream ciphers create a long stream of bits, and then you XOR that with your data stream. So it's random, apparently random bits of 1 and 0 come out, and you encrypt the data 1 bit at a time to create an encrypted stream. And at the other end, they run the same mathematics to create the same bit stream and XOR it again and decrypt it. That's how web encryption works. It's how RC4 works, which is used for many versions of HTTPS. The other one is how AES works. You have a block of data. You have something like 8 or 16 bytes of data, and you run it through the engine and get 8 or 16 bytes of ciphertext. And then you run the next block and the next block, and everything has to come in chunks. That works fine too. It turns out in practice that the stream ciphers suffer from the fact that they tend not to be white cryptographically, which means they are not like white noise in audio. The most popular stream cipher is RC4, and it does not have an equal chance of producing every byte of output. The byte 127 happens slightly more often than it should. And that means if you collect millions of samples, you can deduce something about the key from it. So that is a failure which leads to a whole series of attacks against the popular stream cipher. The block ciphers suffer from what we already talked about, the padding oracle attack. Since you have to encrypt blocks of data, if the data doesn't fit neatly into the block size, you have to add padding, and the padding leads to a series of attacks based on guessing what was in the padding, which make it possible to sometimes crack in. So nothing is ever perfect, and in fact, we have flopped from one to the other. A padding oracle attack came out, so we went to RC4, then an RC4 attack came out, so we went back to padding, and the padding, and it's just sort of, this is the way the whole internet is, like a ship with leaks sailing through the ocean. We pass the leak and another hole appears and we pass that leak and we all just keep going, which is like our political system, right? I mean, we elect a leader, the leader's no good, they do stupid things, we kick them out, we put in another leader, some people are happy, a bunch of people get mad, we kick them out and put in another. None of them really know what to do or do the right thing, and yet we just do the best we can and keep going. So this is what was used to encrypt movies, stop people from pirating them, was CSS, the content scrambling system. This was a symmetric encryption key it used 40-bit key. And then if you had an authorized player, it would have the key in the firmware of the player. So of course, it didn't take hackers very long to find that key and steal the key. And since it's a 40-bit key, it's impossible to brute force it. So they wrote a tool that would brute force it. And this led you to the illegal prime number, which is closer. Political activism is closely connected to cryptography because it turns out that government and legal systems frequently pass laws that make no sense if you actually understand cryptography. And this is one of them. So this is the DeCSS code. So this is a C program. That is the whole thing. And all this does is it tries all possible 40-bit keys. So it really only takes a few lines and a few loops to try all possible keys. So this will crack into any copyrighted movie and make an unauthorized copy. So according to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, circumventing encryption to steal copyrighted content is a crime, and distributing software to do that is a crime. So knowing this is a crime, and distributing this is a crime. And what they did was, if you use pkzip or WinZip, the zip program algorithm, it turns out that you can turn this into a long number and zip it, and you can add extra digits at the end that are not used when you unzip it. So you can make it into other numbers. So you can turn this into a single prime number. And they did that, and that became the illegal prime. And it's down here someplace. There. They may not put it on here because there's a number that is 1,401 digits long, which is illegal to know and illegal to distribute. So people found a way to put it on T-shirts and wear it and publish it on blogs. And if you did, then the record industry would demand that you take down that blog immediately. And everyone did it until they ran out of energy to make you take it down. And this was to publicize how ridiculous this all is. That, you know, brute forcing a 40-bit key. This is trying to make it illegal to be smart. That's essentially what most cryptography laws are down to. And that's why the US government has been the ridiculous situation for decades of trying to say the Chinese and the Russians don't have mathematicians. They'll never figure this out if we don't tell them. Like, you idiots. They're smarter than us. Logic is... There's no way we're hiding math from our enemies. Our enemies have very good mathematicians. You need to come up with a better way to protect us than to pretend you're saving our lives by hiding mathematics from our enemies. That's not going to do it. Sorry. So DES is the official encryption system recommended by the government and used for decades in the United States until the 90s. This was approved by the National Institute of Standards. And so in 1970, they decided it had not been part of their mission. Before this, they didn't worry about cryptography because there weren't very many computers. There was no internet. Nobody had a problem. Now the internet was coming up and important in business, and computer records were everywhere for banking and government. And they said, we really ought to have an official encryption system we can trust. So they had they asked vendors to submit algorithms. They went through a process of testing them, and IBM proposed something they called Lucifer, a 128-bit encryption algorithm, because they could do the math I just showed you back in the 1960s, and they figured out that you better have 128 bits, and then that will really be strong. Nobody's getting in there. But somehow the National Security Agency decided to shrink it to 56 bits and make that the official standard. Even then the computers could have done 128-bit symmetric encryption. It's not that hard. So they created this thing and called it the Data Encryption Standard and published it and said, this is what you should use. And they made special hardware chips called the Clipper chips that they put in all the terminals, and everybody encrypted everything with DES. It was the standard, just like the foot and the gallon. It was just a standard everybody used, and everybody's hardware and software worked on that. In 1988, people began to worry that computers are fast enough, it might be breakable. In 1997, it was broken in 3 months. And in 1998, the EFF in San Francisco built DeepCrack, which was a special processor chip designed to do just this calculation really fast. And they made a computer containing many processors of the DeepCrack type that could do many, many calculations. And they were then able to try the entire 56-bit key space in 3 days. So they could just get in there without the key, and that proved that you got to quit trusting this stuff. It was only cost them like $10,000 to build that, and it is now in the realm of almost any attacker to do it. And that, by the way, is so anyway. You can do it. This also in Python. And let me just do this one live because I think it's useful to see how easy Python makes all this. And the cryptography class here, we do all this in Python. This is why Python is the language to learn. If you're going to be a hacker. And I heard from someone that the CS program here finally changed their model to start with Python instead of starting with Java or C++ the way it was, which I think is wonderful because C++ and Java are too difficult for beginners. You should start with Python. C++ and Java should be your second or third language, not your first. That's my opinion, and apparently the CES department has figured that out. So, because in Python, you can run it in interactive mode. You don't even need to compile the code. So, first, you have to import the DES. So it's from crypto.cipher. You import the DES library. Because people have written libraries that do everything. Now, you set a key. Now, the key has to be a certain length. And I think it has to be exactly 8 bits. 8 bytes. So there's 8 bytes. And the cipher equals, now you create an object, which is des.new based on the key. This is a cipher object of DES type. Now I can encrypt messages. So I can set plain text to be hi there. That is 8 bytes. It is a block cipher. You have to have a key that's 8 bytes long, and you have to have messages that are multiples of 8 bytes long. So let's start with an 8-byte plain text, and then make cipher text equals cipher.encrypt of plain text. Okay, and then print cipher text. So that's just random garbage. It's hard to, some of the characters are even unprintable, so I'll put it in hex to see the whole thing. All right, I guess I have to do it with dot hex encode or something. Yeah, dot encode hex. Okay, fine. It's a different kind of object. This way. Okay, so that is the hexadecimal value of my encrypted stuff. And if I print the plain text, that's just hi there. So hi there turns into this scrambled garbage, much of which is unprintable. And in order to decrypt it, you just use the same technique. So I can just calculate cipher.decrypt, cipher text. The person at the other end who has the key can do this and get back to the plain text from the cipher text. Now, the problem is, if I try to do a different encryption, if I try to encrypt a different message, like send money now, it will crash because it must be a multiple of 8 bytes in length. And so you have to pad it to be a multiple of 8, and that is a problem. But other than that, that's how it works. You encrypt, you decrypt. It works with the key, but none of this proves it's safe. And as we now know, it's not safe, because even if you don't know the key, you can just try all possible keys with a computer you can reasonably get your hands on, and so it's no good. Right, so we had to improve DES to make it safer. Now, well, one version of this was triple DES. This was the first attempt to fix it. And triple DES does 3 rounds of DES encryption. So this was very much like WPA. WPA was intended to fix the problems in web. And just like WPA, you now have a huge problem. Once you have adopted a standard and the standard can no longer be trusted, you now have millions of dollars of installed equipment speaking the old standard. And it is, nobody is ever going to go for throw all your equipment away and everybody has to buy new equipment. That is unreasonable. What they need to do is gradually move to the new standard. Like when it's time to replace this stuff in 3 or 4 years, then we'll buy the next generation of stuff. So you have to have a transition period where people are still using the old standard and the new standard. So you have to make a new standard that is compatible with the old standard. This is what happened with television. We had black and white TV, and they wanted to go to color TV, so they made it so you could watch the color TV signal on a black and white set, and it would work to have legacy support for the old stuff. So triple DES was the fix. Instead of having a totally different system, we're just going to run 3 rounds of DES encryption. Now, what I thought triple DES was when I learned about this is you make 3 56-bit keys, and you encrypt 3 times with 3 different keys. That would seem to be the logical thing to do. That would make it much stronger, and that is not what triple DES does. What triple DES does in most common implementation is you have 2 keys, and you encrypt with 1 key, decrypt with the other key, and then encrypt with this key again, which is very strange. Now, the end result is it's stronger because there are 2 keys, so the key length is effectively doubled. And the reason you do it that way is if you make a new triple DES device, you feed in 2 keys. If you want to run it in single DES mode, you just make those 2 keys the same. And now it will encrypt, decrypt, and encrypt with the same key and result in single DES. So the piece of hardware can have a little button that says, run it in legacy mode to be compatible with your established infrastructure, or run it in secure mode if you buy all the new stuff. And that's what you can now sell a device to a bank and say, you can add this new device and it will work with the old stuff. And when necessary, when you replace everything, then you can upgrade to the new stuff. That's why it was done this way. But anyway, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with triple DES. Triple DES is considered secure enough for any purpose. The effective key length is 112 bits, and that's long enough that there's no way in. It is slower than AES, which is the replacement system that took a long time to come out, but it's okay. If you're encrypting with triple DES, and if you're protecting your wireless network with WPA, you're okay. Those temporary stopgap measures turned out to be pretty good. All right, but the real replacement was AES. They had a new round of submissions. They chose a new encryption algorithm. This one came from Rinjail, and this one has 128 bits or 192 or 256. They wanted it to have different levels of security because 128 is used by civilians and 256 is used by the military. And it turned out to be a very good idea because quantum computers are going to blast through 128 in the next decade or so, but they can't get through 256. So even a gigantic change in the world, like quantum computers, does not make AES obsolete. The more secure version will still be secure as far as anybody can tell, even in a world with quantum computers. So AES, you can do pretty much the same thing. The only problem with AES is the key, everything's 16 bytes long. Your key has to be 16 bytes long, and your data has to be 16 bytes or multiples of 16 bytes. So you still have that padding issue. But other than that, it's fine. It takes plain text and scrambles it in apparently random stuff. And all right, so there are other ciphers. These are the runners-up, which were not approved and stamped by the government as the official encryption system, but they were not broken. So they're considered very good, and many people would rather trust them than AES because they have lack of faith in the government, and they suppose the government probably hid some backdoor in AES, although no one's ever found one. So if you want other ones, IDEA is one, free for commercial use. Bruce Schneier used to be the head of security at British Telecom. He's one of the most famous cryptographers in the world. He gives talks everywhere. He often submits things to these contests, and he is a very good cryptographer, so his submissions go right to the end. Nobody hacks into his stuff. He hasn't won yet, where one of his became the official algorithm, but not for any terribly good reason. His stuff is good, so he has Blowfish, and I think he wrote another one called Twofish, which is fine, and you can use it to encrypt your stuff. It's just not the government approved algorithm, but it's perfectly fine as far as anybody knows. And for stream ciphers, the most famous one is RC4. These are all invented by Ron Rivest. Ron Rivest is the R in RSA. He's been a cryptographer. He's been around for many decades from MIT, and his students hacked into the Boston subway about 5 years ago. We talked about it at DEF CON. It became a worldwide scandal. They defeated the MyFair system, which is what BART uses and most people use, this system of putting magnetic stripes on cards. They totally found vulnerabilities in it where they could hack into subways and other systems. And he also writes a whole series of cryptographic algorithms, and he always puts his name in it. There's RSA, there's RC1, RC2. It's Rivest cipher. They're named after him. So Rivest cipher 4 is the most widely used stream cipher. We've been using it for years, and people are still using it, although now I think all versions of it are no longer approved by browsers to use for HTTPS because it has this problem of not being perfectly white. And that turned out to lead to a series of attacks. So it was in WEP and WPA, and it's in several versions of HTTPS, but people have now begun to realize they just need to quit using RC4. And there's a bunch of people, for the last couple of years, there's been a lot of discussion of this, talking about how you can break into versions of HTTPS that are based on RC4. So there is an RC5 that Ron Rivest made, and I don't know anybody that's using it yet, but they might be able to, but it is a block cipher. So I'm not aware of any stream cipher to replace RC4. Right now, the pendulum has swung, and I think stream ciphers are in disfavor at the moment. But we could very well go back to stream ciphers when somebody finds yet another generation of attacks on the block ciphers. So RC5 has many different versions you can try. And this is where I said 56-bit key was cracked in the late 90s, and a 64-bit key, RC5, has been cracked. It's very handy for proving the power of brute force attacks because there are many different sizes. So there's a 72-bit brute force underway, and it is expected to take 1,000 years. So you might say, why are they even doing it? And the reason they're doing it is because if the first slide of math I gave is correct, it will take 1,000 years. But if Moore's law continues, computers will get 1,000 times faster in 20 years. So 20 years is equal to 1,000 years at the current rate. So this is just like everything. If Moore's law continues, then we're going to rocket into an unbelievable scientific future in our lifetime. And if it doesn't continue, then things will just proceed in a normal way, and we'll linearly, and the world will pretty much hold still. The reason the internet is such a complete mess is because of Moore's law. Everything keeps improving so fast, we never have time to finish anything. Nobody gets to learn anything. Every generation, the last generation above them for being clueless and lost. Everybody's stuff is getting automated so fast, we can't train workers to keep up with it. If Moore's law is what drives this technological revolution that is making the world change so fast that everybody feels sort of lost. And if it were to stop, we could settle back to a world where you did what you were taught you were to do in school, you did the same thing your parents did, you lived in the same town, and all that stuff might come back if Moore's law were to stop. But there's no sign of it stopping. Anyway, I've got some Kahoots, and I see we're right on target. Okay, so let's do this, and then we'll take a break. And nobody knows, right, whether Moore's law is going to keep on doing it or not. So we'll try 123 and see if I got some chapter 12s in here. I do. Life is good. Okay. Okay. You write spectra and meltdown or a temporary slowdown. That has always happened. But what has happened is every time they reach the limit of one type of technology, they invent a new one. So they're kind of hit the limit of silicon. They can't really make the chips any smaller than about 15 nanometer channels, but they can move to optical computing. So, I mean, and then they can move to quantum computing. So, you know, it has happened, strangely, that every time they reach the limit of one technology, somebody thinks of a better idea, and you make a whole different kind of stuff to move forward. And that is, everyone says you can't count on that continuing, and there's no good reason to expect it to continue, but somehow it does. At some point, you would think they would hit a real limit, like you have 1 atom per bit, but every time they hit a limit that looks that severe, they find a way around it so far. So this is religion almost. Is there a real physical limit, or is it just in our mind? And apparently in computers, it's all been just in our mind so far. There's a way, you just haven't thought of it yet. You would like to think there's some limit, but maybe not. Anyway. All right, it looks like we got all the players. Okay. So, which one uses Rinjail? That's the name of the mathematician that invented it. All right, that is AES based on Rinjail. All right. Not a popular answer, but that is the actual name of the algorithm. That's the name of the mathematician that invented the algorithm that received the government award of being named the advanced encryption system that everybody should use. All right. So how long should your symmetric key be? Okay, right now, 128 bits is uncrackable as far as anybody knows. There's a much harder question, which is suppose you're encrypting things like medical records. People are not going to be happy if those leak even in 30 or 70 or 100 years. So how can you promise them that it'll still be safe in 100 years? And the answer is, God knows. If you accept the linear model, this 128 bits will be safe until the end of time, but we don't know. So, all right. So what security goal do you not get with symmetric encryption? All right, the one thing you definitely do not get is non-repudiation. There are two people with the same key, and you can never know for sure which one of them encrypted or decrypted something. Okay, which system was never approved by NIST, but is still considered strong? Okay, that's IDEA. Was one of the runners-up for AES, and nothing wrong with it that anybody knows. It just did not get chosen to get the prize. All right, which system is unsafe and should not be used? All right, that's DES. DES is like WEP. It was used for a while, but now anybody can get in, so you're fooling yourself if you encrypt stuff with that. The bad guys can get in without the key. All right, so it's 11:05. We'll take a break till 11:15. I've got A and M dot. I know who that is, and Eli. A will have to tell me who they are to get their points. M dot, I know who that is, and I'm pretty sure Eli is a real name, so I can track that down. All right, but we'll pick up in 10 minutes. Getting cold. I need to get a thinner jacket. I put it on and it gets too hot. All right, now people said something about the scores not updating for Project 19.
The grade summary sheet wasn't
Well, that only happens.
not loading at all.
Wait, let me see if I can understand this. You're talking about this one here?
Yeah.
Oh, that only updates when my grader actually, whoa, wait, not coming up at all. Oh,
That's loading all right now.
oh. Well, thank you for telling me. That's a problem. And I wonder what caused that. I wonder if that's true for all my classes. Ah.
It pointed at it listed the other two as being.
Oh, that probably just means that the last time it was uploaded, there was a problem. I can fix that by going, in fact, I can fix that right now. What's up with you?
So the project 19, I can get this page.
How do you get to that page?
Yeah, I mean, try that everyone.
123 projects. What page? 19. Okay. And how do you get there? Reset it. Okay. Then you try doing one of these things. Let's try the one that steals the, here's one that probably pretty much, the one that dumps names in the SSN. Let's see if that one works. Okay. If I put that in here, it works. So I think it's all working. So what did you do to get that?
Yeah, I just followed the YouTube video. I mean,
Well, I don't know about that, but what's the problem? I mean, it is working.
so I think the reset first.
Yeah, and if you do these things here, they seem to work. You go down and do some of like this one here. Give me the SQL SSN thing. If I can get this copy and paste to where it gets. So see if you can recreate whatever's not working, because I'm not seeing it. Looks like it's all working to me.
Yeah, but I followed the video you uploaded.
Well, I don't know about the video. But we're working one time. Would be missing the organs, right? We need virtual organs. Yeah, this is an issue of the brain stuff. All right. Well, see if you can get it to work on the live thing, whatever your problem is.
Yeah. So,
And I'm going to run to my office. I'll be right back.
okay.
Because I can fix the score sheet. I'm going to pause. Okay. So the scores should be up. Let me show you that. Let's make sure things are good. So there's this. And here's the scores. And you have to refresh that page, and there it is. So, and the people with green already have an A, and the people with yellow already have a B. So a lot of people have already finished, which is pretty normal at this time of the semester. All right, so that's back up. Thank you for telling me. I did not, something went wrong with my upload process, but all I had to do was repeat it, and it was okay. So let's get back to here. So now we're going to talk about asymmetric encryption. So the problem with symmetric encryption is that you have to distribute the key, and two people have the same key, and that seemed insolvable. But in 1979, asymmetric encryption came out in public research, and it later came out that the I don't think it was ever officially announced, but the rumors I heard is that the NSA had it 20 years earlier, which is the NSA is 20 years ahead of all of us, like they should be, and so is GCHQ. The military stuff is ahead of all the civilian stuff, which is why if you really are brilliant and you want to do this stuff for a living, you will be forced to join the intelligence agencies because they're the people really on the cutting edge, and the rest of us are lagging behind. But anyway, the problem is they would like to keep this stuff secret forever, and they tried very hard. But if you're smart, you can figure out math without anybody giving it to you, and that's what happened. Eventually, people outside the military reinvented it because they were just smart enough mathematicians. So here's how it works. You have to make a key pair, 2 keys. You make a private key and a public key, and now you can receive secret information. You cannot send it. You can only receive it. Now this actually matches a system we use all the time. This system right here. You can go up to a mailbox and you can put mail in, but you can't take it out. The only person that can take it out is the postal worker that has the key to open the bottom door. That's how it works. You can't. The post office has a public and a private key. They have a public door anybody can use, and they have a private door that only the authorized people can use, so anybody can send things. This does not make it possible for you to receive secret things. The only way to make it possible for you to receive secret things is you have to put something like this on your house, like Amazon is doing now. You'd have to add some kind of extra special door to your house that would let people in. So that's how private key encryption works. So now, if you want to send a secret to anybody, you have to get their public key, scramble it with their public key, and you'll create ciphertext that nobody on earth can open except the one person that has the private key. And this is a much better system. With private key encryption, you make a secret and then you share it with somebody. With public key encryption, you make a secret and you never tell anybody. And this has been true forever. People have said this. The only way to keep a secret is if only one person knows it and they never tell anybody. If you ever tell anybody, you really don't have a secret anymore because you have no clue how many people have spread that secret. And that's how this works. You make a private key that you never tell anybody. Now, in order for it to work, the private key must have a mathematical relationship to the public key. So the stuff scrambled with the public key can be unscrambled with the private key. So you have to have this strange, imperfect concept of a one-way function, where somehow the mathematical relationship between the private key and the public key is easy to do one way and hard to do the other way. And that is the weak spot in this system. And that's what quantum cryptography is messing up. But anyway, when it works, and right now, as far as anybody knows, it's working very well, this gives you authenticity and non-repudiation. If somebody encrypts something with their private key, you can open it with the public key, so I can now sign something and everybody can verify that I signed it. And I can't deny later that I signed it because nobody else has my private key. So now you've got these things necessary for doing commerce over the internet. And without public key encryption, you would not be able to do business over the internet because there'd be no way to sign something and be held to the contract. And that's what the Digital Millennium Copyright Act did under Bill Clinton. It made the asymmetric key-based encryption signature the same legal force as a signature made with a pen on paper, so you could do business deals over the internet. All right, so that's the game. Asymmetric keys have to be much longer than private keys. The math is much more complex, so it is much slower, like a lot slower, like 100 times slower. But it's more scalable. If I wanted to send private messages to everybody in this room, I'd have to have a private key and share it with you, and then another private key and share it with you, and another private key and share it with you. And each of you would have to make a whole set of private keys equal to everyone else. So if you have a group of n people, you need something like n squared private keys. So this doesn't scale to the internet. We'd have to have a different key for every website and for every user. But in asymmetric cryptography, all everyone has to do is make one private key and one public key. And everybody, like when I go to Google, if I go to Gmail, I get their public key with their certificate. So we've done this before, but here, I'll just use mine. Sam's class has a public key. If you go to here and view the certificate, my site is HTTPS. Yeah, I can't expand that part, but I can expand it for the people in the room. So here's the certificate. And if you go down here, I'm using elliptic curve with DSA signature with SHA-256, and it has a public key, and there it is. I'm using an elliptic curve algorithm, and my public key is down here someplace. And I'm sharing it with all these other websites, which is kind of unsanitary, but I got it free, so that's how they make it cheap. Here's the fingerprints. I got it SHA-1, an MD5 fingerprint, which, by the way, is not considered the best at all anymore because both of those systems have been broken, but that's what I have. And somewhere is the private key, which I'm somehow not finding. There it is, the public key, there. Excuse me, you don't find the private key, you only get the public key. That is my website's public key. Anybody who wants to send me data can scramble it, and all the people on earth use the same public key. And you could send me a credit card number or password, and I'm the only person that can receive it, because only my server has the private key. That's how it works. We all share the same public key. So all we need is one key pair for every entity on the internet, and that's it. And to add one more person to the internet, we just need to add one more key pair. And they don't need to tell other people the private key. Of course, they only need to put the public key someplace where people can find them. So they put it in this certificate, which is held on certificate servers. This is how it's normally done. So now everybody who wants to talk to you uses your public key, and they all use the same key. And if you want to sign anything, you sign it with your private key. And that's it. And anybody can use your public key to verify your signature. So that's the game. This RSA is the original algorithm to do this based on prime numbers. Here's Ron Rivest, the guy I talked about. With these three people, Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman made it. They put their name on it, and it became the backbone of the internet, was RSA encryption. This is what SSL uses, and now TLS is what we're all using. So you can do it in Python. You will see that the key is much longer. So you can generate a public key, 2048 bits long, which is the current recommendation. And then when you encrypt something, like encrypt this message, it turns into this really long junk that it comes out as long as the key. And you can decrypt it if you know the key. And those keys are actually quite complicated. And in the cryptography class, we talk about the formatting of that long key. This was invented by Diffie and Hellman. Diffie and Hellman invented the heart of the RSA system to exchange keys over the internet by trading numbers that were the product of prime numbers that could not be factored. So this was the game. They found a way where two people at each end guess a number. Then they trade numbers over the internet that result in them agreeing on a key without ever directly sending the key over the internet. That was the miracle system here. And it's based on the one-way function that if you have two prime numbers and multiply them together, that is easy. You can do that quickly. But if you have the product and you're trying to find the two prime numbers it's made of, that is hard. And there's no known way to do it fast. So if you make the prime numbers large enough, this becomes the one-way function at the heart of it, where you can put out this public key that is the product of two numbers, and the private key is the individual numbers, and nobody can find the private key from the public key in any reasonable amount of time. That's why it holds together. Now, it turns out that you can use group theory and specify this problem more generally, where there are private keys which are combined to make a public key with a one-way function, and you do not need to use prime numbers. There are other systems. There's a system based on elliptic curves, which was developed after the original RSA, and it is much faster, 20 times faster to compute because the keys are much shorter, and it is mathematically considered as safe. So the NSA has been pushing this for like the last 10 years, telling everybody to switch to ECC. And as I just showed you, my website uses ECC because my certificate came from Cloudflare, and they only started doing it about 2 years ago, and they're using the current recommendation from 2 years ago. So this is fine. ECC should just save everyone time and money and make encryption cheaper. There is another system called El-Gamal, which is based on discrete logarithms, and it's available also, and we go through these in more detail in the encryption class, but these are all based on the same general logical model of public key encryption, where you have private keys that are combined to make a public key, and you have a one-way function that makes it difficult to find the private keys from the public key. Unfortunately, in 2013, here's some of the scandals. This is one I mentioned before. The NSA poisoned the ECC algorithm. They poisoned the random number generator. They told you to use certain numbers to create the random numbers without explanation, and if you do that, what was proven by mathematicians on the outside of the security community is that this means there could be a secret number inside the NSA that can predict those random numbers. They did not prove that that has happened. And by the way, if you did prove that that did happen, you would probably be prosecuted for treason or espionage or something, because that would involve actually finding out what they do in the NSA, and you're not authorized to know that. But they proved that mathematically it could have happened. And I went to a conference just about this issue, TrustyCon, a couple of years ago, and Bruce Schneier was there, and I thought he was by far the most sensible person at the conference. And he said, this is probably how you do a no-bus system best. This is and the National Security Administration wants to have no bus. They want to have a backdoor into everything that nobody else can use. They call that nobody but us. That is their goal of encryption. And that is what they have been trying to do, which has been making cryptographers very angry at them. That's what they tried to do with DES and every other system. They want to make a system that is so strong that will protect consumers from criminals, but not from us. We're the only ones at the back door to get in. And as Bruce Schneier said, the best way to do that is probably to poison the random number generator, because it is almost impossible to tell that that has happened from the outside. You can run random numbers and they look really random, and how do you ever know they're not really random? Anyway, so this turned out that they did have a system that was apparently backdoored, and they paid $1 million bribe to the RSA company to make it their default encryption in their products, which they accepted and did. And then I think it was Microsoft researchers that actually figured out that it had probably been backdoored. And that created a scandal, and they had to quit using that algorithm. So a lot of people got very angry, and the more privacy-oriented people like Silent Circle began banning all approved algorithms. And now most people that are serious about privacy refuse to use anything just because the government recommends it. And the evidence for that is very strong, that they are not just paranoid fools. They are in fact correct. In order for the government to recommend something, they pretty much have to have a secret backdoor into it. And the FBI is very clear about that. That is their opinion, that they should have a secret backdoor into everything. And many people agree with that in government, especially in Britain, even more than America. In Britain, they have more terrorism and more war, and they are generally more patriotic and trusting their government. And they ask people in the street, and they say, it's perfectly fine if the government has to read my email to catch terrorists. That seems like a good thing to me. That's not the American belief, but we don't have that much terrorism over here. If we had a 9/11 every year, we'd probably change our opinion about how much we enjoy the government spying on us. Anyway, so quantum computing changed everything. And in 2015, NSA reversed their recommendation and told everyone to quit using the ECC they'd been telling us to use, because they suddenly said quantum computers are not just science fiction, they're real and they're coming. And that means all these public algorithms are shot. And as a temporary stopgap measure, we recommend doubling or quadrupling your key sizes and going back to RSA for the next few years. So they say use RSA, but make your key 4096 bits long, and that should get you through the next few years while we have a new round of contests and we develop new quantum-resistant algorithms. And nobody knows what those are yet. We are in the first year of the multi-year process now of developing new quantum-resistant algorithms, and that's what we should all jump to. Some people are already trying to make quantum-resistant algorithms, and that is a really bad idea at this point, and the worst example is the cryptocurrency IOTA. IOTA chose to make what they called quantum-resistant hashing and quantum-resistant encryption algorithms by making up their own, and as anybody could have told you, they made huge mistakes. If you invent your own cryptography, you are an idiot. The smartest people on Earth make this stuff. Unless you are one of the 10 smartest mathematicians on Earth, don't invent cryptography. Just use what they have invented. This is like building your own rocket ship. There's a guy that thinks the Earth is flat, and he's building his own rocket ship to fly up. And we all think he's an idiot because he is an idiot. And that's exactly who you are if you make your own cryptography. You think you're smarter than the smartest mathematicians on Earth. You're not. Just get over it and use the standard approved stuff or the standard unapproved stuff that's still strong. But if you invent your own, you are just going to be humiliated, as they prove that you made some mistake that they figured out 200 years ago, and it's not that smart after all. So here's the current recommendation. If you're going to use elliptic curve cryptography, the keys have to be 256 bits long. RSA, you should quit using all these and use things longer. So even 2048-bit keys are no longer recommended for RSA. It doesn't mean people can hack into them today, but it means when quantum computers develop more, they will get into it. And I said before, my personal opinion which not based on any certain knowledge, is that this means the NSA has quantum computers working already. Their history is that they don't give us this kind of panicked warning saying, oh my God, change your course right away, unless they really have it working behind military classification. They don't bother with that just because they think it might come around in the next couple decades. But anyway, so that's the game. There is no working quantum computer right now that does anything exciting. There are prototypes with just a few qubits like you did in the extra credit project, so you can see how it works, but there is no technology for any amount of money you can buy that will actually break a current strong cryptographic algorithm on a quantum computer. But everybody expects that to happen within the next 10 to 20 years. And that means the people that are ahead, like the security agencies, probably already have it. And pretty soon the governments will have it, and then the large crime syndicates will have it, and then the huge corporations will get it, and eventually it'll be on your desktop in about 20 years. All right, so this is what we're supposed to use now. 3072 bits or longer for RSA, or 384 bits for elliptic curve. All right, and there are other problems. It turns out that a lot of people don't make random prime numbers, they just reuse existing prime numbers. So a lot of certificates are in fact mathematically related. And it turns out that until the latest version of TLS 1.3, and I think also 1.2, the HTTPS protocol lacked forward secrecy. So you could collect data today, archive it, find the key next year, and then open it. You can't do that anymore with TLS 1.2 and up, but that's what the NSA is absolutely doing. They have a giant data center in Utah where they're archiving incredible amounts of data. They're encrypting, they're taking all the data on the internet and saving it to crack later. Obviously, because later you have more private keys because you managed to hack into computers and steal them, and later you have more powerful computers to try more guesses. So, you know, they are archiving stuff that they can't decrypt that, and with the hope of decrypting it later. And that will no longer do them as much good as it would, because since Snowden spilled the beans, everyone jumped rapidly up to TLS 1.2, which has forward secrecy, which means every session has a new key. So if they do find the key later, they're only going to get in one browser session, not every browser session. So here's how a digital signature looks like. If I make a loan agreement and I want to sign it, I take the loan agreement in like a Word document or a PDF or something, I turn it into numbers, I calculate a hash value, like an MD5 or a SHA-1 or a SHA-2. Then I encrypt the hash with my private key, and that is the signature. Now I post it on a public website or anywhere. Anybody that wants to prove that I signed it, they take the document and hash it, and then they take the encrypted thing and decrypt it with my public key. And if those two things match, that means that I signed it because I'm the only person on earth with this private key. Nobody else could make anything that would decrypt with my public key. And it proves that nobody modified it because the hash of the document matches the signature. So that means the bank can foreclose my house, take it, because I should agree to something and I cannot, non-repudiation. I can't deny that I signed it. They can prove that you signed it and it has not been altered. This is what you really agreed to. And that's what's necessary to do business over the internet. So that's called the digital signature standard. Been around since the 90s. The original version required you to use the RSA algorithm, and that's the one that people use now. The original one used SHA and RSA. And now it would be nice to update that to like SHA-2 and maybe ECC or something, but it's fine. So you can encrypt your email with this stuff, and it's very strong. PGP is what Phil Zimmerman made, and he then spent the next 10 years in huge legal trouble with the government as they tried to stop him from putting this on the internet and making it available to our enemies because it was encryption that the spy agencies can't get into, and they regarded it as military secrets leaking the country. So PGP does not use a centralized certificate authority. You can use a model where you sign keys with your friends and friends of friends signing it, so you don't have to trust a certificate authority server. That model is not popular at all because it's not practical over the internet. Most people accept the certificate authority model, but a certain number of people, like professional cryptographers that date from before certificate authorities, trust their friends of friends more than they trust this. PGP can use a variety of algorithms, and you can set it to use whatever you want. On internet, people use SMIME to encrypt email attachments, which uses public key certificates like HTTPS. And there's another encryption technique called privacy enhanced mail, which is just a competitor, and it hasn't been as popular. It's not used that much anymore. Anyway, that's as far as I plan to go today. We'll do more of this next time. Encryption is a big enough topic to deserve 2 classes. And so that gets us to the second set of cahoots. But there are plenty of holes in everything, most of them not caused by the math, but caused by the other things involved in handling the data. Crypto Groot. Somebody's always Groot. These are good names. There you go. I saw a guy with a t-shirt, I think I might have to make one too, that says, knock, knock, race condition, who's there? I think, that's good. I just wrote up race condition for one of my other classes. That's a good demonstration. So, all right, I guess we can go. Looks like no more are coming, so off we go. Okay. Okay, which system does key exchange but not encryption? Okay, Diffie-Hellman. That was the essential missing ingredient. How do you move a key without directly sending it? That's enough to create the heart of public key encryption, but he did not bother with the encryption part. That was the thing that cracked open the world and gave us something beyond symmetric encryption for non-military users. Military already had it, but none of us had it. All right. So Alice sends a message to Bob with public key encryption. What key does she use to encrypt it? Okay. You're going to send a message to Bob. You use Bob's public key. And by the way, these names are famously from the original paper that published this stuff. It was Alice sending a message to Bob, and Eve is the evil person trying to break into the message without the key. And then they do all the math showing that with this system, Bob can open it, but Eve can't open it, so it's a good system. All right. So that's Bob's public key. You send it to anybody, you need their public key. Your sender's cryptography has nothing to do with it. Public key encryption is only a way to receive secrets, not to send them. This turned out to be a huge problem for Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden wanted to leak top secret documents to a journalist, and he did not want the NSA picking it up on the wire because he knew more than anybody on earth how the NSA would totally see everything he sent over through email. So he wanted to send it with public key encryption, but the journalist was not technical enough to make the key pair. So he was delayed while the journalist had to find a technical assistant to set up their key pair so he could use this encryption. That is the huge problem with public key encryption. It requires the destination machine to have a key pair. This is why Hillary Clinton sent plain text emails, because you can't send emails to the heads of nations in other countries with public key encryption because they aren't technical enough to receive it. It requires technical expertise at the destination, and that is a really miserable model. So if you are highly technical and they are not, it's useless to you. That's a problem. And that's why what it works for is things like Google, where Google is smart and they set up their server to receive the secrets from us. That works. We can have a wimpy little cell phone and be using out-of-date stuff, and Google is the one that has to do the hard job. But it doesn't work so well for email. And that's why most email still goes without encryption, because the system for all the receivers to be ready to receive encrypted email is just not in place yet. Although, if you use something like Gmail, it is encrypted in different ways. Like it never goes on your machine. You view it in a browser and use HTTPS to view it on a Google server. So in fact, it's encrypted for many hops, but it's not really always encrypted for every hop along the way, like it should be. Anyway. All right, so Alice sends a message to Bob using public key encryption. What key does Bob use to decrypt it? Okay, he opens it with his private key. The sender's keys have nothing to do with it. You receive mail with your public key and you open it with your private key. Who it came from is not part of it at all. All right. So what is the NSA's goal for backdoors and encryption? And so is the FBI's goal also. But this is the NSA term for this. No bus. We want a backdoor that nobody but us can use. That is what they are trying to achieve. The civilian side wants to create encryption that nobody outside can get in at all, and that is the current battlefield. Which system is most efficient using less CPU and RAM? Okay, that's ECC, elliptic curves, that is their advantage. The keys are short, the math is fast. Okay, so I got Ming, which is a real name, I think, and Forrest, which is a real name, and I think Bennis is too, but I don't know who A is. So A is going to lose their points if they don't tell me who they are. Is A in the room? Oh, good, then I'll get it from you after this. All right, folks, so I think that's it. I'm going to stop this. There is no hacker club today, and I'll be around. Oh, good, here's Bennis online. Good, good. I got your name. Okay. Yeah, and so I'm going to stop the share and I'll go upstairs for a while and see if people want help on projects. And then I'll come back down at 1 for the